The first time Eliza saw him, he was little more than a shadow clinging to a larger, darker one. It was a Tuesday, the kind of damp, gray Tuesday that seems to suck the color right out of the world. She was locking up the small, weathered community library where she worked, her fingers fumbling with the cold metal of the keys, when a movement in the alleyway across the street caught her eye. A woman, gaunt and sharp-edged, was yelling at a boy, her gestures frantic and angry. Eliza couldn't hear the words, but their venom was clear across the distance. Then the woman did something that made Eliza's breath catch. She shoved the boy hard against a brick wall, spat something at his feet, and then turned and walked away, her figure dissolving into the twilight, without a single backward glance. The black boy, he just stood there. He didn't cry. He didn't call after her. He simply pressed his small body against the rough brick, as if trying to become a part of it, to disappear. His name, Eliza would later learn, was Samuel. But in that moment, he was just a child, abandoned and terrifyingly still. Something fractured inside Eliza's carefully ordered heart. For 10 years, her life had settled into a quiet, predictable rhythm of books, tea, and the gentle, lonely silence of her small house. She had long ago accepted that motherhood was a path not taken, but as she watched that small, solitary figure, every dormant instinct roared to life. She crossed the street, her footsteps unnaturally loud in the evening hush. He flinched when he saw her, his eyes wide with a fear that was far too old for his face. He looked to be about 7 or 8, dressed in clothes that were too thin for the weather and too large for his slender frame. "Hello," she said, her voice soft, the way one might speak to a startled animal. "My name is Eliza. Are you all right?" He said nothing, just stared at her with those huge, dark eyes, full of a mistrust that broke her heart all over again. "Are you hungry?" She tried again. "I live just around the corner. I have some hot soup on the stove." It was the promise of food that did it. A slight, almost imperceptible nod. She didn't touch him, just turned and started walking slowly, praying he would follow. A moment later, she heard the soft scuff of his worn sneakers on the pavement behind her. That was how Samuel came to live in the little blue house on Willow Street. The legalities were a nightmare of social workers, court appearances, and home studies. The woman, his aunt, had been his last living relative, and she had signed away all rights without a hint of remorse. Samuel, it turned out, was a quiet ghost in the system, and Eliza became his unlikely anchor. The first few months were a dance of silence and patience. Samuel spoke rarely, and when he did, his voice was a hesitant whisper. He was like a careful observer, cataloging her habits, learning the rules of this new, bewilderingly clean and quiet world. He would stare in wonder at the simple act of her setting a place for him at the dinner table, as if he couldn't believe the chair, the plate, the food were all for him. Eliza learned his story in fragments, whispered in the dark when she tucked him into bed. His parents, gone in a car accident when he was 4. Shuffled between relatives who didn't want him. His aunt, who saw him as a burden and a government check that was never enough. He learned to be small, to be quiet, to expect nothing. But Eliza gave him everything. She filled his room with books, knowing words were a sanctuary she could offer. She learned to cook foods he liked. She helped him with his homework, and she told him every single night that he was smart, he was kind, and he was loved. When she enrolled him in the local school, her stomach was a knot of anxiety. The town was predominantly white, and she saw the way some of the other parents looked at them in the grocery store, a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. She saw the way they saw him, a black boy with a white woman, an obvious outlier. The bullying started almost immediately. It began with whispers and stolen glances in the hallways. Then came the names. Not just the predictable, hateful racial slurs, but cruel taunts about not having a real family, about being a project for the lonely librarian. Samuel would come home with his spirit dimmed, his shoulders hunched. He never cried. He had learned long ago that tears solved nothing. He would just go quiet again, retreating into the shell Eliza had worked so hard to draw him out of. "They called me a charity case today," he muttered one afternoon. Throwing his backpack on the floor with uncharacteristic violence, Eliza's heart clenched. She sat down next to him on the sofa, not touching him, just being there. "And what did you do?" "Nothing," he mumbled, staring at his hands. "What am I supposed to do?" "Look at me, Samuel," she said, her voice firm but gentle. He reluctantly met her gaze. "Their words are a reflection of their ignorance, not your worth. You have a right to take up space in this world. Do you understand me?" He nodded, but the pain in his eyes remained. The worst day was in the winter. A boy named Kyle, the ringleader of the bullies, had cornered Samuel in the locker room after gym. He'd shoved him, called him a string of vile names, and then, with a cruel laugh, had thrown Samuel's schoolbooks into a muddy puddle of slush outside. Samuel came home shivering, not from the cold, but from a rage and humiliation so profound he was shaking with it. His books were ruined, pages stuck together, covers warped. He stood in the doorway, dripping mud on her clean floor, and for the first time, Eliza saw tears of pure anger welling in his eyes. "That's it," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm not going back. I can't." Eliza didn't tell him it would be okay. She didn't dismiss his pain. Instead, she did what she always did. She went to her toolbox. She got a towel and gently dried his hair. She made him hot chocolate. And then she sat with him at the kitchen table and looked at the ruined books. "All right," she said calmly. "So they destroyed your books." He stared at her, confused by her calmness. "But they didn't destroy what's inside them, did they? The stories are still there. The knowledge is still there. And more importantly," she leaned forward, her blue eyes blazing with a fierce light, "they didn't destroy what's inside you. They think this will break you. So let's show them how wrong they are." That night, a new ritual began. After dinner, the kitchen table became their fortress. Eliza, with her lifetime of love for literature and learning, became his personal tutor. They didn't just do homework, they conquered it. She made history come alive with stories, turned math problems into puzzles to be solved, showed him the music and poetry in words. She saw a fire ignite in him. The taunts, which had once made him shrink, now seemed to fuel a steely determination. He stopped seeing school as a place of torment and began to see it as a battlefield where he could win with the one weapon they could unbreak, his mind. He started to read voraciously, devouring books from her library. He asked questions. He dug deeper. He stayed up late, studying under the glow of his bedside lamp. Eliza was his constant, his coach, his unwavering believer. The change wasn't overnight, but it was undeniable. His grades, once average and languishing, began to climb. A B+ on a history essay, an A on a science project. His teachers started to notice the quiet, focused boy in the back of the class, who now raised his hand with intelligent questions. By the time he reached high school, Samuel was no longer a victim. He was an enigma. He was reserved, but his intelligence was formidable. He joined the debate team, and with Eliza as his practice opponent, he learned to articulate his thoughts with a clarity and power that left his competitors, including Kyles Tammering. He was respected, if not entirely understood. The culmination came in his senior year. He was valedictorian. Standing at the podium in his cap and gown, he looked out at the sea of faces. He found Eliza, beaming at him with tears streaming down her face, and he found Kyle sitting slumped in the audience. In that moment, he felt no hatred, only a distant pity. His speech was not about triumph, but about gratitude. He spoke of the power of one person to believe in you so fiercely that you start to believe in yourself. He didn't name names, but everyone knew. He received a standing ovation. A full scholarship to a top university followed. Then law school. Samuel excelled, driven by a memory of cold soup kitchens and colder words, and warmed by the memory of a woman who taught him his worth. Eliza grew older. The little blue house seemed quieter after he left, but it was filled with the warmth of his weekly calls, his holiday visits, his framed degrees on her wall. She was proud, endlessly proud, but she missed the boy who had filled her house with a purpose she never knew she needed. 15 years after that graduation day, a long, sleek car, the kind that never drove down Willow Street, pulled up to the little blue house. Eliza was in her garden, her hands buried in the soil, her hair now a brilliant silver. A man got out of the car. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, carrying an air of quiet authority and success. But when he saw the woman in the garden, his posture softened. He was Samuel, but the fear and hunger were long gone from his eyes, replaced by a profound, settled confidence. "Mom," he called. Eliza looked up, squinting against the sun. A wide, beautiful smile spread across her wrinkled face. "Samuel, you didn't tell me you were coming today." "I wanted to surprise you," he said, walking over and enveloping her in a careful, strong hug. He smelled of expensive cologne, and, underneath it, like her son, they sat on her porch swing, drinking lemonade, just like they used to. He told her about his work as a civil rights attorney, about the big case he'd just won. He talked about his life, his apartment in the city, all the things he'd built. Then he grew quiet. He took her hand, her knuckles knobby with arthritis, and held it gently in his own. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Eliza's eyes widened. "Samuel, what is this?" "Open it." Inside was a key, not a car key, a house key. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I bought a house, Mom, a big one, out in the country. It has a huge library with windows that look out over a lake. There's a garden that's even bigger than this one." His voice grew thick with emotion. "There's a room in it. It's yours. It's always been yours." Tears filled Eliza's eyes. "Oh, Samuel, this is too much. This is your home. This is your success." "No," he said, his voice firm and clear, just as hers had been all those years ago. "You are my success. Everything I am, everything I have, is because you saw a scared, hungry boy in an alley and you didn't just give him soup. You gave him a future. You fought for me when no one else would. You taught me how to fight for myself." He looked at the little blue house, then back at her. "You gave me everything. This is just a house. I want to take care of you now. Let me do that. Come live with me. Let me fill that big quiet house with the sound of your stories." Eliza looked at the key, glinting in the afternoon sun. She thought of the lonely woman she had been before, that gray Tuesday, of the profound silence that had filled her life. She looked at the man her boy had become, strong, kind, magnificent. She wasn't just accepting a key to a new house. She was accepting the full, beautiful circle of a love she had planted in the darkest of soils. A love that had grown against all odds to tower over every hardship, every cruel word, every moment of doubt. She closed her fingers around the key, its metal warm in her palm. "All right," she said, her voice choked with happy tears. She smiled at her son. "All right, let's go home." The new house was not just a house, it was a testament. Nestled on a gentle hill, it overlooked a serene lake that mirrored the sky. The library was indeed huge, a sun-drenched room with floor-to-ceiling shelves that were, as yet, mostly empty. Samuel watched her as she walked in, her gasp echoing softly in the spacious room. "It's cathedral," she whispered, her hand over her heart. "It's your cathedral," he corrected gently. "And these empty shelves are a crime. Consider it our new project. We'll fill them together." Her room was downstairs, with French doors that opened onto a stone patio and a view of the water. It was the direct opposite of her small, cozy bedroom on Willow Street, tarry, vast, and filled with light. For a moment, she looked overwhelmed. "It's too much space for just me," she said, her voice small. Samuel came to stand beside her. "It's not just for you. It's for all the books you'll collect, the grandchildren you'll read to, the friends you'll have over for tea. It's for the life you put on hold to give me one. Mom, you spent years making sure I had enough room to grow. Now it's your turn to have room to breathe." He had thought of everything. The garden was already partially planted with her favorite flowers, peonies and lavender and climbing roses. A gardener would come, he explained, to do the heavy lifting, but the planning, the nurturing, the cutting, that was all for her. That first evening, as the sun set over the lake, painting the water in strokes of orange and violet, they ate dinner on the patio. The silence was different here. It wasn't the lonely silence of the little blue house after he'd left, nor was it the tense, fearful silence of his childhood. It was a peaceful, earned quiet, filled with the chirping of crickets and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. "Thank you, Samuel," Eliza said, her voice steady and clear in the twilight. "Not for the house, for this, for keeping your promise." He looked at her, puzzled. "What promise?" "That night with the ruined books," she said. "You told me you couldn't go back. And I told you we would show them they were wrong. And you looked at me, and you nodded. That was the promise. You trusted me, and you never gave up. You showed them all." Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. "I had the best teacher. He did not just move her into his house. He wove her into the fabric of his new life. Her wisdom, born from a lifetime of reading and a deep well of empathy, became his secret weapon. He would discuss his cases with her, and she would offer a perspective he hadn't considered. Her insights, often cutting to the very human heart of a complex legal problem. Colleagues would comment on his clarity, his compassion. He would simply smile and say, "I have a good editor." The little blue house on Willow Street was not sold. They went back together one bright Saturday morning. Samuel had arranged for a realtor to meet them, but Eliza had asked for a moment alone inside. She walked through the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing. She stood in the doorway of Samuel's old room, remembering the small boy reading under the lamplight. She ran her hand over the kitchen table, where they had fought their nightly battles with homework and self-doubt. The house was just wood and plaster and paint. but it was saturated with the memory of their love, the sheer force of will that had built a family from nothing. She turned to Samuel, who was waiting quietly in the hall, giving her this moment. "I'm ready," she said. They decided to rent it out for below market value to a young family from the community center Eliza knew needed a break. It felt right. The house that had been a refuge for them would now shelter someone else. As they drove away from Willow Street for the last time, Eliza did not look back. She looked at the man driving, her son, who had taken the shattered pieces she had gathered and had not just repaired them, but had built a masterpiece. She had found a boy hiding in the shadows, trying to make himself invisible, and he had grown up to build her a house full of light. The story had not ended in triumph over bullies or academic success. It had simply settled into this quiet, profound peace. The circle was not just complete, it was unbreakable.